What up, Outliers? Quick market update. We got two things to look at today. We got Rocket Lab USA post earnings, and then we have GameStop. There was some really interesting options activity over the last couple days that I think we should talk about. So we'll start with this quickly, and we can see overall RKLB has been up and to the right. This is a 3-month daily chart. If I take us out to a year, it's essentially been parabolic. So what's going on in here? Well, if we take a look at some of the internals before we pivot over to earnings, and we talked a little bit about RKLB last night, but this will just touch on some of the higher level components. It's been in favor, again, for the past year. When you see stocks moving like this so strong for extended durations, they tend to build a lot of momentum. That's actually why momentum is a very tradable factor in the stock market. It's one of the few things we can like truly quantify, isolate, and put positions on based on that effect alone. And if we just peek through some of the key news as we see like this here, they had a solid earnings. I don't think there was any big shock there when we were looking at the options last night leading into the earnings. It was definitely bullishly positioned. Now, what's really interesting though is the move today was different than I would have expected. The main reason for that is I wouldn't have expected it to break all the way up here and then get rejected all the way back down. That is a lot of selling pressure. So those are people that are really, really happy to just see this up here, and they're getting out, they're fading out. Now, understanding how many of these people are folks that have, built in profits, I would imagine that would be a lot of them, because there's just not that much volume that actually transacted above this current level, right? It's just not that old of a company. Most of the volume was transacted down here at like 466. So these are people that got in down here. And I mean, they tripled their money plus, which is, I mean, they actually, if they top ticked that, I forgot that it broke above 20. So they literally would have 5 times their money and then some. So the overall movement today was really interesting to me. I didn't expect to see quite this shape of a candle, and we need to see how it goes tomorrow. My guess is a lot of the sellers probably got it out of their systems, because otherwise, I mean, it definitely could have trailed down more on the day. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't have otherwise, because if you look at the volume today, overwhelming volume, 120 million shares traded today. Their 5-day average is 41 mil, which includes this day, obviously, and then 18 mil. Before this, the 5-day average was 20 mil against 14 mil. So just an explosion in volume, and the majority of it was sale, 95%. And it stayed up there, which that was pretty interesting for me to see. So let's take a look at the options. We knew that there was some pretty heavy call skew coming into the earnings release. And if we break this out by expiration, you can see that it was about 2-to-1 calls to put. So there was definitely people playing this to the upside, not massive positions, but big enough for sure to appreciate pretty handsomely over the move. And these are really short dated options. So a lot of them are going to be coming off soon. And on a longer term time frame, it still maintains pretty heavy call skew. So overall transactions today, 308,000 calls. And we can see 22% were at the bid or below, so sold. 30% opened, and 46% somewhere in the market, probably a mix between these. I have to imagine lots of people taking profits, especially on these shorter term options, because there's not a giant incentive to hold these 15s into expiration at this point, even if they're far in the money. It's just a little bit more risk. But I mean, who knows? You never really can identify what the rationale is for a trader. So interesting move here altogether. Now, from a quick broader market perspective, a few things stuck out to me. Tech is still really strong. So you can see comms up here and then tech sector here. They're still definitely leading the pack. And then we still see this really weird breakdown. And I can't put my finger on it between staples and discretionary. Discretionary is still hitting highs, and staples is still trending negatively over a 3-month period, which like I said, I can't put my finger on it. It's weird. And real estate struggling, not a big shock there. Utilities kind of trending sideways. I think you're going to find some really isolated strength within utilities, right? So we know Trump's policies really favor things like oil production, stuff like that. It's not going to be as favorable to things like solar, wind, definitely not wind. As you could tell, Trump is not a fan of the whales being hurt. If you guys aren't familiar with the joke that I'm making there, is from the Joe Rogan podcast, where they spend a while talking about the impact of windmills on whales. And I have to be honest, I had no idea that that was a thing. That was actually new information for me entirely. And so in healthcare, healthcare is not happy. Big pharma is not looking good. And we've seen this being carried out pretty consistently, right? So if we look at Pfizer, I mean, it's just barely catching a bid down here. It's overall still sucking wind, essentially from when the election was known, right? So you can see there's the 5th, there's the 6th, and boom, down she goes. Big drop off. I think Big Pharma is going to have to figure out what this might look like with RFK and his overall involvement, right? If they start getting in front of their advertising spend, I don't even know how big of an impact, to be honest, interfering with the advertising spend of Big Pharma is going to be. Typically, it's a big deal, but I just can't think of many consumers that are like asking for specific drugs based on an ad they've seen. Obviously, they're smart and they're spending the money for a reason, but that part I can't figure out. But I also think more importantly, if they're giving donations and stuff like that to other news agencies, it does create misaligned incentives, right? Because if I'm Pfizer sponsoring parts of your show, you're more likely to not necessarily emphasize stories that besmirch my brand. So that part, I think, is more likely to be detrimental. The ad spend itself is interesting, and maybe it's part of that. So let's take a look at GameStop. And specifically in GameStop, it is holding this rally like pretty comfortably. I know some people are a little dejected that it's not, mooning right now, but this in and of itself, in my book, is a pretty strong victory, right? Like, look at this candle today, even in GameStop, it's this like invert hammer. But the thing that's important is take a look, big volume, big sale volume, and it's still really held its own. Now, does this mean it's starting to roll over? It's hard to tell. It's a little early to tell, in my opinion. We can see from an RSI perspective, its momentum is slowing, but we can visualize that. So what I thought was a little more topical from GameStop is actually this. So if we take a look at the options volume, and I want to specifically look at these that came through. So the 40s on the 12th, which is yesterday, they got tapped not over 3,000 times, right? So you can see a 3,000 lot that got pushed through here that was worth over $1 million. This does start to look interesting. And there's a lot of people asking me if I think that this is Roaring Kitty, especially because I've just spent literally almost 3 months analyzing every single one of his trades. And what I can say is this does fall closer in line with what I would expect to see from him. Now, whether or not that's him, nobody knows, right? Like, there's other people that trade, and it's always important to keep that in mind, because I know a lot of people are just fingers crossed, hoping that it's him stepping in. And I would love to see that, to be clear. I'm in that same camp. But I always make that comment because if that's the basis that you're making trading decisions off of, it's just a little more difficult to rationalize. But in terms of days to expiration, strike selection, this is very much in line with what we've seen from him historically, right? So we can see that there's 3,000 of them here, 1,400 of them here. And again, these are the 17 Jan 25s. We can see another 2,000 here. We can see another 1,000 here. We can see another 800 going through here. So like there's tons of these 40s getting hit. And again, it's a little further out in time. So this is not like some sort of really short-term YOLO-esque style trade. This is deliberate positioning, and this is deliberate positioning to the upside. Now, I do find it a little bit interesting that there's no sale on these. And the reason why I find that interesting is because if we take a look at the different times that these were transacted on the 12th and on the 11th, it was kind of towards the end of the day. So 26. So somebody had the opportunity to get out at about a 10% gain overnight. And they kind of looked that in the face and they said, "No, I don't think so. I'm going to hold." So it's clearly, to me, an indication that somebody's kind of trying to play a bigger move, not just playing the short-term first move that's put in front of them. So we'll have to see what these materialize into. I'm curious what you all think about the overall options activity in here. It's questionable to me. It looks interesting, but this is definitely larger trades coming through with some level of conviction. If we take a look over the last couple days specifically, the majority of this higher volume, that's several hundreds of thousands of dollars, essentially has been from the 12th on. There's definitely some trades earlier than that, but the bulk of it has been in the last couple days. So I'm keeping a really close eye. I didn't see a lot popping off today on the 13th to any significant degree. But as always, I'm poking through markets, seeing if anything is jumping out looking interesting. And so far, it looks like there's a building phase going on, right? Because we can see that down here, another 1,000 of the 40s got hit on the 13th. They got hit yesterday at a couple different times. So this is building out a position of some sort. We'll see what it looks like. As always, any questions, let me know. Be an outlier. See you later.